Okay, before we move on, I want to address probably something that everybody's kind of interested in, and it's being shown in a sense and understood. Of course, we know that we have a pineal gland. We know that this pineal gland is supposed to be calcified. That it looks somewhat like, not only does it look like an eye, but it also looks like a pine cone. And then curiously enough, we find it associated with the third eye, which relates itself to spirituality, at least in the Eastern philosophies, and then of course now in some Western philosophies. All ancient cultures had some form or way of identifying this connection to the spirit world, and most were using the third eye understanding or symbolism. So we can tell for a fact that there's something there. Even the Vatican itself, being representative as it likes to represent itself, the spiritual authority, religious authoritarian on this world, it even has in its main courtyard this giant statue, or one of its main courtyards, this giant statue of a pine cone. And then of course, if you check the Sumerian pictographic reliefs, you're going to see that these very same Anunnaki are depicted as holding these pine cones. And then these pine cones now are going to represent this spiritual knowledge, but yet it's the spiritual knowledge that was corrupted in a material way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is at this point we can identify with the fact, historically and physiologically, that we have a pineal gland and that it's being represented in ancient cultures. Now, if we can relate this back to the Vatican and its symbolism as controlling the pineal gland, or at least the spiritual vision of the nations of the world, as it's really trying to say, we can see where the control begins to take place and how all of this is going to relate us back to the Garden of Eden event, which is this symbolic apple with this knowledge that once one took it, you would become wise and be like gods. The only thing is that they themselves are the ones that have been corrupted with this spiritual knowledge that's been corrupted in a material way. They're not offering that knowledge to the masses. They're taking this knowledge that they're getting from the fallen sons, who are having to use this knowledge. That's the kicker. The fallen sons are having to use this knowledge because in the book of Enoch, really I guess what I'm saying right now, the knowledge is not for us to use, okay? Keep that in mind. So the knowledge or the technique in question of this Kundalini rising using the chakras and the pineal gland has been perfected because we find out that these fallen sons of God, or the watchers in the book of Enoch, were cut off from communication with the heavens, and that they were going to be bound on earth. And we find out that their lifespans were going to be limited to that of 500 years. In short, it means that when they rebelled, they cut themselves off from their spiritual prerogatives, their spiritual qualities that were inherent in them before the rebellion. Once they rebelled and they aligned themselves with the will of the fallen prince, the very same existential laws that were promised to them by the free will granted by God was taken away. And now they themselves were bound to the very same free will that the Father gave us, of which we still uphold on this planet. So all of this is going to connect back to these beings needing a way to overcome their spiritual handicap, their spiritual powers. Well, the Kundalini rising was it. The fallen prince, Enki, never was in physical form, regardless of what Zacharias Sitchin would have you believe. That's part of his mission, was to cloud the facts there. So Enki, Anu, and Enlil have never been in the material. They were always in the spiritual. His job was to contort that and make them appear as physical beings. The other Anunnaki, as the Agigi and the such, were the material beings that we would know as the sons of God of Genesis 6. But nonetheless, these beings, after they rebelled, they needed a way to bridge the spiritual handicap. The Kundalini rising and the manipulation of the physiology of the chakras of the human body, of which they themselves were in, became the medium in which they were to get back their spiritual power and their enlightenment. But it is not for us. I'll be back.